When I was 21 years old, I gave birth to my first child. It was only after more than a decade had passed that, looking backward at that experience, my first labor and delivery, that I was able to name why this incredibly transformative, entirely beautiful experience also had a lasting emotional impact on me that was incredibly difficult to traverse. You see, the entire birthing experience for me was chaotic. A big part of that was because we made zero preparations. Birthing preparations or classes I might take to prepare for the experience, support I wanted to have in place at the time, even things like who would be in the room or who would join in the waiting room, and did I want music or television or certain scents. I just shrugged my shoulders at all of that. There were absolutely none plans made for the first birthing experience of mine. No choices expressed. And as such, the space in which I gave birth, it was chaos. No one knew what I wanted or how best to support me. I didn't know what I wanted or how best to support me. At the time, I was young, and I was also already trauma-ridden, and mostly, though, I knew nothing about the practice of intentionally curating space for myself. 3 more births followed the first fairly closely, and with each one, I continued to put little to no effort into deciding what kind of space I would give birth in. And so while those experiences sure got a little better each time, they were still all pretty chaotic, and I had a really hard time emotionally processing them. With each one, I was left with what I can only describe as this overwhelming feeling of like, what just happened? Rewind to my life story years before my first birthing experience, and I had my first experience with death. My mother passed in her bedroom at our home after many years of illness. And there was, yet again, little, if any, intention around how that space, that dying space, was curated. No one got together to talk about what support would be needed. There were no intentional decisions made ahead of time about who would be in the room or how we wanted to walk through that experience together. It just happened to us. Birthing and dying are 2 experiences of great and lasting consequence, right? They're transformative experiences. And I had them at a time in my life when I didn't yet know anything about curating space and building structures of support. My children were born into the world. That still happened, right? And my mother passed from this world. Those truths, they're unchanged. Those events, they were happening no matter what, right? But my experience of those events and the lasting impact on my life, well, there was a lot of room for those experiences to be different. No matter what, birthing and dying hold within them severe pain, great difficulty, grief, loss, struggle. But pain and struggle, they don't have to be traumatic, and they don't have to lead to suffering. And in fact, they can breed connection, grounding, growth, beauty, healing, and wholeness. I'm choosing to share these vulnerable experiences of birthing and dying with you today because for me, I think they so poignantly and accurately get at some deep truths about what we're doing here at Sojo. And they also hold within them an invitation for all of us as we work together to create a culture of belonging. Last week, we launched our series on It All Belongs, and we explained that our sweet little catchphrase that we have, it all belongs, it's just shorthand for describing what we're all about here, which is building an ethos of belonging, a culture whose spirit and intention behind everything else we do is belonging. We live on this earth in community, period, right? That truth is inescapable. Humans everywhere. But our experience of that, of living life together, it can be so different if we learn to intentionally curate spaces of belonging where we build structures of support. Living in community will inherently involve pain, struggle, loss, grief, great difficulty. And it can be how we grow and how we heal. It can be beautiful and life-giving. It can be grounding and healing. It can foster wholeness. I now know what birthing and dying experiences can be like when structures of support are in place and when the space is intentionally curated. And I see here at Sojo what community can be like when structures of support are in place and the space is intentionally curated. One gorgeous, life-altering way that the work of birthing and dying can be done in this way, with intentional curating of space and the building of structures of support, is through the role of the doula. A doula is a support person trained in the needs of the person or people going through the transformative experience like birth or death. A doula will help you curate the space where the birthing and dying takes place. And in so doing, they drastically reduce harm and trauma. And they increase the connection, growth, and beauty that can be found in these experiences. Doulas support the full process of birthing and dying so that folks are able to freely move through each stage, including grief and struggle. At Sojourn Grace Collective, we are birthing a new way of being in the world. We're birthing an ethos of belonging. And at Sojourn Grace Collective, we are letting old patterns, old systems, old theologies, and religious and societal structures that actively work against belonging, we're letting those die. We are a group of people undergoing great transformation. So, like the birthing room and the dying room, we act as doulas, belonging doulas. Every time someone starts engaging in our community here, they are letting something else die. A way of thinking, a way of being. And I do want to be really clear that I'm not just speaking to our crowd of folks who come from spiritually abusive backgrounds or religious trauma. Those of you who didn't ever go through that specific experience, you still live in our society, which overall does not have an ethos of belonging, and in fact, in so many ways, actively works against a culture of belonging. And so we are all dying to that way of being and birthing a new way. Communal living is just happening. We're all together in this. But belonging takes intention. It takes great care, planning, pruning, course correcting, navigating, tough decision-making, and fierce protecting of the space. This morning, I want to quickly touch on just 3 specific aspects of being belonging doulas that are vital to creating this ethos of belonging. We obviously could talk a lot about for a long time all of the ways in which we can be belonging doulas and what that looks like. But I've narrowed it down to just 3 specific ways this morning. And I landed on these 3 things that are important to being belonging doulas based off of those birthing and death experiences I told you about and how they were chaotic and traumatic. And I looked at them and I assessed what I think was most missing that led to those lasting, difficult emotional experiences. And so these are the 3 things that I think were most lacking in those experiences and that I see us really leaning into here at Sojourn as belonging doulas. The first is this: everyone is a doula. We take turns. Colby and I are not the doulas, or not the only doulas. We are all here to walk each other home to ourselves, to support each other through the birthing of a whole new way of walking through the world, to stand vigil as we let everything that must die pass away. This is a give and take, back and forth, be on the lookout for who needs a doula and step up when it's time sort of job. Secondly, a belonging doula protects the space. In curating spaces with an ethos of belonging, protecting the space is a paradoxical sort of practice that's required. Because if we said it all belongs in a flippant, allowing of whatever sort of way, and who cares, it all belongs, doesn't matter what we say or what we do, if that were the sentiment behind it all belongs, we wouldn't actually be fostering a community with an ethos of belonging. It all belongs is not an allowance of anything. It is, rather, a prophetic anthem we sing in hopes of reaching our ultimate goal of belonging for all. In order for everyone to experience belonging, not everything can be allowed in the space. Like our birthing and dying metaphors, there are things not allowed in the room when a doula helps someone curate a birthing or a dying space, because some things are antithetical to those processes, actively working against them, and so those things can't be allowed. So a belonging doula fiercely protects the space. And lastly, a belonging doula normalizes experiences. To continue with our birthing and dying metaphors, there are all kinds of aspects of dying and birthing that, while those processes are entirely natural, the experiences within them are disturbing. And one of the most profound roles of a doula is to normalize those experiences so that a person can move through the process emotionally and not get stuck. In the movie A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Fred Rogers is sitting in a room with a family who's preparing for a death. He's in a dying room, and I think he gorgeously acts as a doula. He says to the family, dying is human, and anything human is mentionable, and anything mentionable is manageable. Our human experiences become unmanageable in a society unwilling and incapable of mentioning them. So the belonging doula normalizes human experiences so that the person can freely emotionally process them. We take turns, we protect the space, and we normalize our experiences. These are just 3 of the beautiful ways in which I see you acting as a belonging doula in our community. This morning, as we wrap up, I just want to take a quick meditative moment as we think about this idea of being doulas who foster an ethos of belonging. So the first thing that I invite you to do this morning is to pause, take a deep breath, and I want you to visualize a time, maybe in your time in this community here at Sojo, but maybe it's some other time in your life when someone acted as a doula for you. Did they fiercely protect the space for you or normalize one of your experiences? And I just want you to take a moment to pause around that experience. How did that feel for you? What did that help you walk through and process? What did that mean to you? Can you go back to that time and hold just a moment of gratitude for the way that someone acted as a belonging doula for you? Spend a moment thanking them in your heart, and maybe later today you go back and just remind that person of what they did for you and thank them for the way that they curated space for you and built a structure of support for you. Lastly, I invite you to take a moment to see yourself in that role. Can you think of a specific moment when you acted as doula for someone else? What was that like for you? To sit with someone in that kind of space, in that kind of transformative moment in community. What did that do for you to be in that role? And can you just take a moment to hold space for yourself in that, to name it as what it was, as such a transformative moment for someone else, to allow yourself to feel gratitude for the way that you were able to step into that role. And maybe later this week, ask yourself, how can I continue to inhabit that role of doula in my community, to protect the space, to take my turn, to normalize experiences for others? Oh, that's okay. May we continue practicing together, becoming belonging doulas in a world that conditions us to be separate and opposed May we intentionally curate spaces and structures of support where belonging is our ethos.